Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find out more about us joining our Tuesday morning group coalition at virginiainstitute.org. You can also find archived episodes of this program online at youtube.com and search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Our first guest this week from the Jefferson Policy Institute, Thomas Jefferson Policy Institute, the great Steve Hayner, contributor to Bacon's Rebellion as well, the blog site. He's not that old. But Steve, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, sir?
I'm fine. How are you? I'm refreshed by a week at the beach, so I'm ready to talk. What's going on?
Very good. Well, first and foremost, the budget wrangling that went on, and certainly a lot of head scratching when Emmett Hanger came to the rescue of the government in lieu of the governor and helped the Democrats defeat the gas tax. But there were significant tax cuts other than that in the budget. Overall, did this surprise you as sort of a new kid in town budget session, or did it wind up sort of being what you've come to be used to?
I must admit, I was surprised at the fierce resistance from the Democrats to some of the tax cutting ideas and their refusal to give on anything. It's considering just how flush the state is with cash. Considering that it's, in many cases, their lower income voters who are getting crushed by the inflation, I was kind of stunned. I think they made some really bad votes. I think they're going to come to regret those bad votes.
Well, especially some of the floor speeches where they kept referring to the gas tax holiday as a publicity stunt, and then Joe Biden goes out into the Rose Garden and says, "Yeah, we're actually considering." It's like
here we are, and it's only half as much. Right. So if he thinks it's worthwhile to cut the tax 18 cents. Why wouldn't a 26-cent cut be worthwhile? I mean, I'm not a huge fan of that stack tactic. I mean, I think if Virginia's collecting too much gas tax revenue, it should just cut the tax period, not do a holiday. But at the same time, I mean, I think there's no question people are feeling that pain, and that would be one way to help it. The other one that amazed me is they did agree to eliminate the food tax, but they held it off till January 1st. That's insane. Do it now. I mean, it wouldn't have cost that much to do it now, but they wouldn't do it now. The Democrats insisted on making you pay food tax through the summer, through the school year, through Thanksgiving, through Christmas. They're going to get rich off that food tax.
Now, I've had this debate with folks, as a matter of fact, the estimable Emmett Hanger as well, where, the discussion always turns into, well, where are we going to replace the money? How are we going to replace the money? Where is the money going to come from? And you had mentioned Governor Youngkin and even Governor Northam before that routinely said, well, we've got $2 million extra dollars this quarter in collections than we expected. Governor Northam.
How about $2 billion?
$1 billion. I'm sorry. I always drop the B. I'm old enough to remember when $1 million was a lot.
We're running in the green, in the black by the billions, not the millions.
Even through COVID, so I understood the idea of the tax cutting, but this idea that the Virginia roads will not get paved if we come up with some new way. It goes back to the McDonnell offer of saying, his campaign promise that he was going to eliminate the gas tax, sort of, once all was said and done. Is there a better way to deal with funding VDOT, Steve?
Well, I got to admit, I have long been an advocate for the fuel tax. I think the fuel tax is a user fee. The more you drive, the more you pay. You can avoid it by getting a more efficient car. So I'm not opposed to the fuel tax at all. I think the fuel tax is reasonably fair. But I also think you should match your spending needs to the revenue. And if your spending needs, right now there's a flood of extra cash coming in to the transportation trust funds. There's no question they could do some tax relief in that area as well and not really hurt the spending program. I mean, if you wanted to go out and spend twice as much on highways, you can't do it. You can't get the supplies. You can't get the labor. So there's only so much you can spend in a year and spend it intelligently. So I think some relief on the fuel factors on the fuel side was reasonable. But at the same time, I think the big relief and the relief that people are going to, it's not as easy to see, but it's the real meat of this is the standard deduction. The fact that they increased that for all those families, like 70%, 75% of Virginians use a standard deduction. They don't itemize their deductions on income tax. So they will see a big benefit from that, and that's the good one. That's the one I'm really happy about.
Is there concern, from the old saw, the supply side, that we're again, there's more money in the pockets of Virginia consumers, but not enough on the supply side to generate the jobs that might be a more consistent and repeatable, healthy economy?
I think again, we're not in recession. I don't believe we're in recession at this time. There's a lot of talk about a recession coming in the year or so. I mean, I think our economy is, again, because there's so much cash, there's so much spending. Right now, a lot of the spending is on travel and on services as opposed to goods. But I think the economy will continue to chug along for several more months before there's any real danger of recession. I think again, government should decide what it needs to do, find out what it costs, and tax only that much. And maybe a little bit of reserve. There should always be some reserves. But right now, Virginia is, because of the inflation. Inflation is a wonderful way for government to make money, and governments love inflation.
That's true.
And so everything they tax goes up in price. They collect more tax. Incomes go up. Prices go up. So right now the real issue is to control that inflation.
Well, yeah, because the Virginians are feeling each time it's 8% consumer price index. What I could try to point out is it's also 10.8% on the producer price index. So eventually, that number is going to have to balance out.
Yeah, well, and select things are 25, 30, 35, 40% increases. So, you got to buy food. Groceries are up 12%. Gasoline is. We've seen what gasoline has done, and that trickles through the economy. I just wrote last week about what's about to show up on Dominion's electric bills, because Dominion is just now getting ready to pass along its fuel cost increases.
You were talking about Dominion and their fuel costs, but also things that Governor Youngkin campaigned on. You wrote a great piece about Reggie is still hanging around, even though the governor said we're going to kick Reggie out of the Commonwealth. Yet there it is in your electric bill.
He's just now, next week when we start July 1st, the new fiscal year, he will have some new appointees on the Air Pollution Control Board. He should have the votes at that point to repeal Reggie. It's a process. I mean, it's a regulation. So to impose a regulation is a process. To end a regulation is a process. It'll take some time. But my understanding is that they are going to propose something that basically would end the tax itself pretty quickly. So we'll see. It's his announcement to make when the time comes, and then we'll react to it. But I think that is coming. Now, the other one I wrote about today is what's going on with the Air Board rules and cars and emissions and our vehicles, because the General Assembly passed a bill in 21. The Democrats passed a bill in 21 that said we had to follow California's regulations on automobile fuel economy standards, automobile emissions. And that can't be reversed by regulation. That's going to take legislation to fix that.
That was all part of Governor Northam's grand, zero carbon neutral Virginia by 2050, correct?
Yep, that was actually one of the ones that didn't get very much attention. But in according to this, in 2025, which is just 3 years away, almost a third of Virginia's, more than a third of Virginia's new car sales are going to have to be non-gasoline, non-diesel EVs, and I'm not sure we're going to get there. I think that's going to be pretty hard to do.
Well, how would that even function? I mean, if I walk into Reynolds Subaru in Orange and said, "Hey, I'd like to buy that Outback," and they say, "Sorry, we can't sell it to you. We're at our allotment."
Well, it's more a matter of when you go to buy that Outback, he'll say, "I don't have any in stock," because the manufacturers can only send me so many.
Is that how?
It controls the manufacturer's shipments, manufacturer's supply. The manufacturers have got to send Virginia X number of EVs, X number of plug-in hybrids, or they can't send the gasoline and diesel cars. And of course, as you've noticed, all their new factories they're building are related to EVs and plug-in hybrids, and so the supply of the gasoline and diesel vehicles is going to shrink anyway.
So what about the supply of the electricity? Because as far as I can tell, there's a lot of people who think there's an electricity leprechaun inside that Tesla charging station that magically makes their battery full again. You mentioned Dominion earlier in the program and their fuel increases and their costs. Is our grid even capable of this between Appalachian and Dominion and the subsidiary electric cooperatives?
It will take a build out. It will take an expansion of the amount of distribution lines. It will probably take, obviously, some increase in the amount of power being produced. And of course, as of right now, it's still mostly fossil fuels creating the electricity. It's still mostly coal, natural gas creating the electricity. The amount of renewables is very small in Virginia. It's growing, but it's still very small.
But it's the irony of it is everyone says, I'm going green, I'm getting this electric car. And I'm like, well, you do realize they burn coal to get to that. What about, you and I discussed this briefly, I guess about a month ago, very quietly. President Biden continues to announce money's coming to nuclear power plants. There's billions of dollars coming to the Commonwealth for both of our nuclear plants here in the Commonwealth for expansion and that kind of thing. And you'd say, gosh, that's kind of notable because I thought we were supposed to, get away from anything like that because it's scary and Fukushima and whatever words you want to say. What about that?
Well, again, there may be some supports out there, and some states are also propping up their nuclear plants financially, but I don't see a lot of growth. I mean, Virginia has the 4 reactors that Dominion owns. They are relicensing those 4 reactors. They should run for another 20, 25 years, but there's no plan to expand. The good news is they're not going to close them. So the sunk costs will continue to produce electricity. But again, I think the environmental community is kind of divided on nuclear. There are a fair number of environmental folks who are honest about it and realize that nuclear power is green power and makes perfect sense. And if you really want to get rid of the CO2 emissions, nuclear power needs to be part of the equation. You look at a country like France, which has done that, and France has been very successful. So then you go just a few miles away and you're in Germany, and the Germans are insane. The Germans have perfectly good nuclear plants, which they are shutting down, and they're burning more coal. So yeah, it's just I think there's something about this whole movement that just sort of kills brain cells.
It must. I know some of my brothers and sisters refer to it as a cult, and I try to avoid that kind of incendiaryism because that generally means people stop listening to you. But at some point, they are actually starting to behave like people said, no, Reverend Moon is just a minister, and you say, well, no, hold on a second here. And that's dangerous because it really, at the end of the day, doesn't do anything to change the temperature of the water more than 1/10 of a degree. And it makes a lot of companies, the same people who scream about cronyism when it comes to Dominion, will then turn around and say, oh, no, but subsidizing the solar cell factory is perfectly fine. That's the part that bothers me, is it's really just rent seeking. Yes,
it is. There's a lot of rent seeking involved. And in all honesty, not just with the solar and the wind folks, but so everybody needs to be on guard for that. I think Virginia, this is going to be a very important election. 23 is going to be a very important legislative election because the General Assembly House Republicans were ready to change a lot of this. They were ready to fix a lot of this. I think some of the bills that Governor Youngkin would have signed, but the Senate Democrats just stood firm and stopped virtually all of it and dug in. And so they've dug in on a very poor defensive line. It's time to assault it.
Steve Hayner's on with us, and always a great chat. And I want to talk some more about our electric woes, because certainly, whether it's nuclear or not, we have the wind farms, and we're going to fill the Atlantic Ocean with wind turbines, right, Steve? And that'll give us all the energy I'm not even sure how the electricity gets from the wind turbines. Do they have that plan yet?
Well, they have there'll be some big old underwater power lines coming in. There's one coming in at Camp Pendleton. There's going to be one coming in Sandbridge. The people in Sandbridge are rather shocked to discover that one of those power lines is coming to shore there at Sandbridge, not down at Camp Pendleton. But anyway, look, the technology is real. The technology works. The problem is it only works when the wind's blowing.
Right.
And it's only going to work for so long. I worked for 12 years for the company that builds aircraft carriers and submarines down in Newport News, and the ocean is a very, very harsh environment. It's pretty hard on steel and other metal products. Mm-hmm. And those turbines are not going to last 40 or 50 or 60 years like a nuclear plant might, or even 80 years. We're going to get 80 years out of these nuclear plants. Mm-hmm. So you will get maybe 25 to 30 years out of these turbines if you are lucky. And so the investment, I think, is risky as all get out. And, it's not that, and you don't see anybody proposing onshore wind, which is much more efficient and costs a whole lot less. I mean, Dominion's doing this because they're going to make a ton of money off of it.
Well, it's the same folks who stopped the pipeline coming across Wintergreen were the same ones who stopped the wind turbine farm that was proposed for up there.
That's right.
So, but the lights still go on there. Now, talk about the Attorney General and his efforts to keep an eye. It's amazing to me that our own Attorney General has to you fight to find out what these public utilities are doing with taxpayer support.
In fairness, he can see it. The Attorney General's office can see all the secret data. They just can't share it with the public. So that's what he's been pushing for is more openness to the public, more openness to the media. And I think I really appreciate his efforts in that regard. I hope he keeps it up. But at the same time, as a participant in the case, he signs an agreement that says, I will not reveal anything that I read. My staff will not reveal what we read, and then they proceed to move forward. So it's not kept secret from them; it's kept secret from us.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the fact that he's trying to make more of it available to us. So again, because I think the general public just does not. It's a complicated process, even if you study it. If you don't pay attention, it's all Greek. They have no idea what's going on. They just pay the bill and move on. And the AG's office. And I worked there as well before I worked for the shipyard. The AG's office has a legal duty to represent consumers, and I think they take that seriously. I think this guy takes it more seriously than his predecessor, but I think they take it seriously.
His predecessor just, every sentence had to have the word gouging in it somewhere, and he was chasing gouging everywhere. Do you, and you hear some of this coming out of Washington, Steve, when it comes to the fuel prices and the food prices. I worry every time whether the president says the Defense Production Act or Pete Buttigieg, scolds the airlines for making him drive home. That we're in a dangerous place where the government is going to insert itself further and further into our industries, who thought it was all fun and games when they were playing regulatory capture with them, but they might not be laughing anymore.
Well, I hope they're not laughing. It's serious. Look, we're dealing with these prices for two reasons. We're dealing with these prices because of the pandemic supply and demand issues. Well, three reasons: the pandemic supply and demand issues, the fact that the Biden administration was engaged in a war on fossil fuels, was sending all the signals in the world that we're going to eliminate fossil fuels, campaigned on a promise to eliminate fossil fuels. And then along comes the war in Ukraine. And the war in Ukraine certainly is a major factor. But remember, the war in Ukraine is only happening because the Europeans have allowed Putin to control their energy supply.
Yep.
There would be no war in Ukraine because the Europeans would not be under Putin's thumb if they drilled their own oil, if they drilled their own natural gas, if they developed their own nuclear power. Mm-hmm. The Europeans have surrendered their sovereignty to Putin, and that's why we have the Ukraine war. So it really, the Biden war on fossil fuels and the European war on fossil fuels are all of the same They're one and the same. So you can't say you can't separate the Ukraine war from Biden's anti-fossil fuel philosophy.
Is there a certain amount you can learn? I hear this when we talk about the southern border issue, and they're like, well, if we just make these countries more prosperous, these people won't be hiking across Mexico to come to our country. It seemed, if I remember correctly, when Putin took over in Russia, its economy was devastated, from the collapse of the Soviet Union and a lot of the falsifications of their incomes then anyway. But the Europeans seem to think that, if we get all this energy from this Russian Federation, they'll be prosperous and they'll be peaceful, and and everyone will win. And I guess that was a fool's errand.
Well, I think it was. You assume a leader like Putin is going to be a rational actor. You assume he will do what's best for his country, what's best for his supporters. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's behaving rationally. I think the man's lost it, and he's trying to recreate this, this grand Russian illusion, and control everything that the czars controlled everything that the Communist Party controlled 50 years ago. I don't think he's acting rationally. I honestly don't. Mm-hmm. I think to some extent, but again, I think the Europeans, the Germans and the English in particular, because the French didn't buy it. The French built their nuclear plants, mm-hmm. but the Germans and some of the other countries allowed themselves to be subjected to this Russian hegemony, and they should have known what they were doing. They should have known it was a mistake.
Steve, let me, speaking of, what comes next in the future, you were talking a little bit about Virginia 2023, which sounds like a Billy Joel song, but I've seen the lights go out on Broad Street. The 2022 midterms, they seem to have found a voice around the failing economy, the inflation. The 2023 election, everyone was sure, and I talked to some political insiders who said they really don't want to fix the education problem right now because they want to run on it too, because they all think that that's the only, since Youngkin won with it, it's the only issue that a Republican can win on. Is there a danger in that, come 2023, Louise Lucas and a lot of the folks?
Again, what I don't really understand yet, I need to spend some more time with, are the district lines. Mm-hmm. And the district lines have a lot to do with how you do in the General Assembly elections. Obviously, there's hard Republican districts, hard Democratic districts, and then a certain number of swing districts. And the opportunity, I think, is there clearly to take the Senate back and to hold and expand the House for Republicans. Maybe not a lot, but somewhat. It depends on the candidates. But in terms of issues, there's an incredible number of issues. I mean, the education stuff certainly has not gone away because the Senate resisted most of it. Mm-hmm. And the energy issues, our economy is continuing to sputter. Again, you talked about the refusal to even grant minor gas tax relief. Mm-hmm. Even 90 days of gas tax relief, they refuse to do that. I think anger over some of that will continue to linger. But again, I used to run legislative campaigns, and it's all about quality candidates, quality campaigns, and then the issues kind of follow. I mean, first you got to find the horsepower, you got to find the people to run, and then you got to raise the tons and tons of money, and that's what they should be focused on right now.
Steve, I don't think we've ever talked about this, but I use the fanciful view of Reince Priebus climbing the escalator at Trump Tower because they had an odd number and they really was hoping to get 14 candidates for the GOP nomination for president. And I say it that way for the chuckle, but also the fact that the candidates often are the ones that create this. If we were waiting for the Republican unit chairs to invent the perfect candidate, we might as well wait for Frankenfurter to bring his monster down from the slab. It doesn't work that way. I mean, the talent needs to kind of rise from the ranks. But and again, we've got a bunch of primaries today. Mm-hmm. And I haven't been paying a lot of attention because it's not my district, but they've got 6, 7, 8, this gigantic army of candidates running, which tells me that everybody thinks that this is going to be an easy year for Republicans to win in November. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's still going to be pretty hard it's still going to take a good campaign, going to take a lot of screw ups by the Democrats. But if you get the talent to emerge, I think it's out there. But again,
I live in a new House district. In my House district, I have a Democrat incumbent who was not my incumbent a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's my incumbent, Rodney Willett. And I don't see that, to my knowledge, there's not a Republican out there moving around yet to run against Mr. Willett. And it's time. It's time for that to be happening.
And this is always a head scratcher for me, and I get it. The TV cameras come on, and you're on Fox and Friends, and it's alluring, or MSNBC. It's alluring to run for Congress, but we always have this. We have, half a dozen gubernatorial candidates, 6 or 7 congressional candidates, and then when it's time to run for a board of supervisor or a school board or even a House of Delegates or state Senate seat, there's crickets.
The pay stinks, and everybody yells at you.
That's my job.
I would never run for board of supervisors. It's a thankless job. I've watched so many of my friends take that job and pull their hair out. Because again, every time you cast a vote in the city council, every time you cast a vote in the board of supervisors, half the room goes away furious with you. It's easier to be in Congress and hide. It's easier to be in the legislature even and hide. I mean, but that's where you're right. That's where the talent comes from, and that's what the party, needs to focus on, is recruiting people at that level, and giving them a chance to run and show their talents and get some experience and.
Steve, what are you working on right now? What's coming up?
I'm trying to put together. I mean, I think I need to sort of reevaluate where we are on the energy issues and what Virginia's next step should be. There's some things I hope the administration will do, and I've got some presentations coming up that I need to sit down and prepare, which I haven't done yet.
Please, I don't want to take you from it, but do you think now that this is always that interesting time where now the executive branch gets the stage, can the governor make some of those cases? Do you think he's got the right advisors in place to get into some of that?
He has some, certainly. I'm hoping the focus, the problem with that job is you can pick 3 or 4 things to focus on. You've got to pick 3 or 4 things to focus on. Mm-hmm. The floodgate, fills up. People hit you with the fire hose, but you can't do it all. You got to pick some things to work on. And he's at a stage right now where he needs to figure out the 2 or 3 things he really wants to get done in the next couple of years. And I think he will. I think he's clearly got a good business head and a good head for planning and for long-term thinking. So I think he will. I'm hoping energy will be one of them, but
sure.
But we'll see.
Yeah, for everyone who has an electric bill. And show of hands, anyone not with an electric bill? It doesn't.
Well, not everyone has a Dominion bill, but all the electric bills are going up.
Yeah.
With this energy cost situation, it's not just Dominion; it's everybody.
Oh, absolutely, without question. Steve Hayner, again, you read his stuff either through Bacon's Rebellion or the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy and the Jefferson Policy paper, the JeffersonPolicyJournal.com as well. Thank you so much for your time this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Joe, anytime. I'd love to talk to you. Thanks.
Coming up next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the executive branch of Virginia's government. First, Governor Glenn Youngkin, followed by Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears.